this is the 50th year of Singapore, and you do a lot of work in global strategy, looking at the cities, etc. So tell me the three things that you think Singapore did right, and what are the three things you think they should do in the next 50 years?
Well, thanks, Lakshmi. Everyone has to view Singapore in historical context. If you look back 50 years, the immediate post-colonial period, there still to this day are very few countries where you can say have genuinely succeeded, where you can say that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, they've made it. And this is one of those countries, perhaps really the one truly successful post-colonial country. So it has to be appreciated in that kind of historical context. What are the things they did right? Well, obviously development, right? From third world to first, as Lee Kuan Yew himself put it in his memoirs, is certainly one very well-known aspect of the Singapore story is the economic growth. Diversification of the economy is part of that. Diminishing reliance on, just being a city-state island, minimizing as much as possible the resource dependence. So as you know now, as of a couple of years ago, they are not reliant as much on water imports as before. Rainwater collection and wastewater treatment and recycling, all of these technological innovations that have gone into creating some degree of self-sufficiency. Peace with one's neighbors. Let's remember the Cold War and the Vietnam War and just how hostile this neighborhood was over the last 50 years. Now, Singapore is not only at peace with its neighbors, but is becoming very much a regional leader diplomatically. Actually, when you ask the question about what could they do better, right, in terms of the next decades ahead, I think that this country. Asia, as you probably know, is the most demographically diverse region in the world. So there's always going to be a lot of friction, a lot of heterogeneity, a lot of diversity. So it's a difficult region to say there's one capital, there's one leader. Right. But there can be a place like Singapore that is neutral in that sense. This is one of the most diverse cities ethnically, racially, religiously in the entire world. In fact, second perhaps only to Dubai, really, which as you all know is truly a melting pot. Here there is a real, strong indigenous population, but in a diverse city, in a diverse region, there is this one place that can serve as what I call the capital of Asia, and that's what I think this city with this country is becoming, is this de facto, in a way, capital of Asia. There's a lot more. There's a lot of geopolitical tension in the region, so this country needs to be perhaps more of a peacemaker. When you think about things like the South China Sea disputes and so on, maybe leverage its relations with China, its influence over China, the model it sets for China to help to kind of create a bit more reconciliation in the region. There's still a lot of things that can be done domestically and internationally, but it's obviously come a long way in the last 50 years.
One of the things you also work on is cities, the growth of cities, the impact of cities. And as more and more cities are being built, more and more people are moving into cities in general across Asia, not just in Singapore. What are some of the trends that you're seeing, and what are some of the things, like in India we're talking about 100 new cities, etc. What are some of the things we should keep in mind as we build new cities?
Well, building new cities from scratch as if from some scientific master plan or business plan is relatively new. It's happened in episodic sorts of ways over the centuries. As you may know, in Myanmar and its history, it's done with dynastic cycles and so forth. But at the scale at which we're doing it in the world today is utterly unprecedented. And Asia is ground zero for all of this because more than half the world's population lives within about a 4 or 5 hour flight radius of right here. So this is the place where you have the most rapid urbanization and the largest population. So it is as necessary as ever, and it will be for 5, 10, 15 years to come, whether you're talking about India, China, or Southeast Asia, which is also 650, 700 million people. The challenge is that too much depends on that one main capital city. You see this happening all over the world. Look at Nigeria. Look at India prior to the last 10, 15 years, where so much 40, 50% of the economy of India was Mumbai. You don't have that anymore, which is a good sign in India. But you still have a lot of countries like Indonesia. so much of the Indonesian economy depends on what happens in Jakarta, the policy directives of Jakarta, the banks in Jakarta, and so forth. But you have over 200 million people. That's not a good national business model. The next 5 or 6 cities in Indonesia, with also large populations, anywhere from 2 or 3 up to 4 or 5 million people, we have such poor data about them. We don't know anything about their labor productivity. We don't actually know their exact population sizes. They're not sufficiently connected. And that tells you a lot about how long it's going to take for a country that big to develop. So urbanization is an organic reality. It's happening, everyone is moving voluntarily into cities, but it has to be so much more strategically done than it's being done so far.
And also I think, especially, only observing it in India, if you want to say, I want my state to have not just 1, but 3 major cities or so. There has to be a decision of the government to slowly help the industry to move there, have incentives, etc. So I think the government also needs to play a big role in making that.
Yeah. So now, again, we mentioned in India, Prime Minister Modi saying he wants to have 100 new cities, 100 smart cities. Of course, one of the first things he does is to call up Singapore. And I would say when the world wants to build a smart city, it calls a +65 country code in order to sort of get it done. So there will be some prominent Singaporean role in that effort, without a doubt. But yes, you see it happening at the state level. So in other words, the provincial level. For example, of course, the creation of a new southern state and capital in India as well, in Andhra Pradesh, right? So that's one example. So you need to have federal support for what the state level is doing, because they understand their circumstances, their people, their skills, their skill base of their population better. So that's one very important angle. But they also have to unlock the foreign investment, right? The foreign capital, the technology, and so on. We see that is obviously a problem right now in India, but it's been much less of a problem in China. And that's partially helps account for the difference in the sort of smart urbanization.
Yeah. And Parag, you work a lot in the area of geopolitical nature. You travel around the world, you see what happens. So what are some of the new things you're working on? What's your current focus on?
I can't reveal too much, but I'm working on global infrastructure. I'm basically arguing that the paradigm of the last 500 years, what we call the Westphalian paradigm, the idea of nation states, discrete borders, and so forth, is not just giving way because of globalization. We all know about that. But what's really driving the change is physical infrastructure connectivity. So if we spent the past 500 years creating discrete nations and states and borders, and remember that in 1945, when the United Nations was founded, it had about 51 members. Today it has more than 200 members. So we're creating new states and borders all the time. But the real story, in my view, is building across them, connecting across them. Yeah. So Autodesk, the software design engineering firm, says that we'll build more infrastructure in the next 40 years than we built in the last 4,000 years. Yeah. And all of that does something. The railways, the pipelines, the highways, the tunnels, the bridges, the internet cables, electricity grids. Think about all of that. It's an enormous volume of connectivity. And I think that is actually changing the entire map of the world, and that the maps of the world that we have that we have hanging on our walls are so fundamentally flawed, because they just show us the political divisions between countries. But what dominates how the world actually works every single day, every single minute, is not those lines. All of our maps are missing all of the lines that actually matter. So I'm in this process of creating what's called a connectivity atlas, and it's a kind of one-stop amalgamation of literally every single man-made infrastructure in the world, and then writing a book about what that means.
Great. We look forward to hearing about it. And I think with all the communication, with 3/4 of the world already being connected, etc., and with the companies being the largest economies, I think there's going to be a whole new geopolitical map that's going to come up, and we look forward to hearing it from you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Parag.
Thank you.